You've heard of Alzheimer's disease, but do you know what causes it? Although some dismiss their role, the neuropathological structures in Alzheimer's disease determine the disease process and can sometimes be attributed to the coexisting diseases.
Alzheimer's disease is an illness of the brain that gets progressively worse over time. So this is why it's called a neurodegenerative disease. You may be familiar with a lot of the symptoms of Alzheimer's because a lot of them overlap with just regular dementia. So if you've ever visited a nursing home, you've probably seen all of these symptoms. The main one is memory loss. That is a key indicator of Alzheimer's disease and just general dementia, but especially Alzheimer's. There are changes in cognitive and decision-making abilities and emotional changes as well. So actually, I work at a nursing home, and a lot of the residents with Alzheimer's do experience depression, and some of them are even suicidal. There can also be major changes in sleep patterns. They might sleep 1 or 2 hours a day. I know at the nursing home, there's a resident that didn't sleep for 5 days straight, like no sleep. So it gets pretty crazy. To understand the neuropathology of Alzheimer's disease, we are going to talk about the neuron. The neuron is the type of cell that you can find in your brain and your nerves. So we start with the cell body. There are 3 main components, and this is the main controlling part of the neuron. And we move to the dendrites. These dendrites are the component that receive signals from other neurons and bring them to the cell body. Lastly, we'll move on to the axon, and this carries signals to other neurons. Alzheimer's disease is known as a tau pathology because it is characterized by the presence of tau tangles. So in a healthy person, tau is a protein that normally resides in the brain, and it just runs in these parallel kind of structures, and it carries nutrients, like pretend this is nutrients that the brain needs. It carries these and other materials around the brain. And then these are found within the neurons, more specifically within the axons, which is the part of the neuron responsible for sending out signals to other neurons. When these proteins become tangled and disfigured, they are known as tau tangles. And this is where they cause problems. When these tau tangles form, the material typically carried by these proteins is unable to travel from one place to another, resulting in the loss of nutrients to brain cells, therefore cell death. What actually happens after this cell death? Well, cell death causes the brain to shrink in size, also known as atrophy. If it shrinks in size, going from this size to now this size, it results in a lot of symptoms like loss of vocabulary, inability to remember faces. A lot of symptoms like that can result from brain atrophy. The structure that I'd like to talk about is amyloid plaques. So aside from tau tangles, amyloid plaques are the main pathological structure that we look for in patients with Alzheimer's disease. So amyloid plaques, also known as amyloid beta, are also found in the brain. Like the protein tau, this specific protein can dysfunction and form clumps of amyloid plaques. And these clumps can cover things like axons and dendrites, which, as we know, form the transportation system of neurons. So when neurons can't communicate with each other, this ultimately also results in cell death. And as we learned previously, cell death results in brain atrophy, also resulting in all these other symptoms. So it's just kind of a continuous cycle. Amyloid plaques can actually develop in other areas of the body. So say this is a cerebral cortical blood vessel, which is a blood vessel found in the brain. Blood is very important in carrying vital nutrients and oxygen. these blood vessels play a critical role in keeping the brain alive and healthy. So let's draw a little amyloid clump. These are definitely not accurate. Anyhow, so this is our clump, and if they get big enough, they can cause these pathways to be blocked, and eventually the blood vessel can burst, causing a ruptured blood vessel or hemorrhage, also known as a brain bleed. And if severe, this complication can be fatal. So here I made a little diagram. We start with tangles and plaques, which are the two main neuropathological structures of Alzheimer's disease. And then these result in cell death by inhibiting transportation system or stopping the flow of materials and nutrients to the other neurons. Either way, they result in cell death. Then this cell death results in brain atrophy of certain areas of the brain, like the hippocampus, which is responsible for visual and verbal memories. And that brain atrophy results in what we see as symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So we've talked about the neuropathology of Alzheimer's disease, but what we haven't talked about is how Alzheimer's disease is connected to other diseases, more specifically cardiovascular disease. You may have heard of heart failure, and this is a condition where your heart is not strong enough to pump blood to the rest of your body, which is the whole point of having a heart. So when your heart does not pump blood to your brain doesn't receive oxygen or other nutrients that it gets from the blood, and this results in cell death, like we talked about earlier.
By focusing on the neuropathology and comorbidity of Alzheimer's disease, scientists can gain a better understanding of the illness. By doing this, we are taking one step towards curing Alzheimer's.